They told me we wouldn't make it through this storm. The wind tore at Sergeant Jason Blake's coat as he trudged through the snowdrifts that swallowed the forest path, each step a battle against the cold that seemed intent on freezing him in place. Blizzard, the white German shepherd at his side, pressed forward, nose low to the powdery crust, ears pricked against the howl of the gale. Visibility was almost zero. The dense flurries blurred the trees into ghostly silhouettes, and the moonlight barely cut through the blanket of white that covered every surface. Jason's boots sank into the drifts, his fingers stiff and numb despite his gloves, and every inhale carried the sting of frost biting through his lungs. The air smelled of frozen pine and damp snow, a bitter reminder of how alone they were, how thin the line between safety and being lost truly was. Blizzard's paws crunched over the ice beneath, and for a moment, the dog paused, lifted his head, and sniffed the air. His amber eyes glimmered like lanterns against the night, scanning the horizon for signs of the faint light they had glimpsed earlier, a dim glow that promised shelter if they could reach it. Jason's heart pounded not from the exertion, but from the fear that each drifted step might take them further from hope. He reached out instinctively to stroke Blizzard's neck, feeling the warmth of the thick coat under his gloved hand, a small comfort against the biting cold. The dog nudged him gently, as if to say, "Keep going, I know the way," and Jason nodded, swallowing hard against the ache of fatigue that pressed into his bones. Branches snapped under the weight of snow as the wind gusted, and the eerie silence between the howls of the storm seemed to stretch infinitely, a canvas for their struggle. Blizzard paused again at the edge of a slight incline, his body tensed, ears swiveling, and then he darted ahead, returning to glance at Jason, urging him forward with a silent insistence. The snow whipped around them, frosting Jason's eyelashes, crystallizing on the tips of his hair, yet the dog's movements remained fluid, purposeful, guided by instincts honed through training and an unspoken bond that transcended words. Each step Jason took was mirrored by Blizzard, shadowing him through the snow, keeping a vigilant watch for hazards hidden beneath the powder, for ice that could betray them with a slip. The cabin's light flickered again through the trees, closer now, a fragile beacon, and Blizzard's tail flicked with restrained excitement, muscles coiled for the final stretch. Jason's breath came in ragged puffs, and he pressed his hands into his jacket pockets, finding the small compass he carried, eyes following the dog's lead rather than the needle. Blizzard's white coat, dusted with snow, blended almost seamlessly with the surroundings, but his movements were deliberate, sure, guiding Jason with unwavering focus. The cold gnawed at Jason's face, reddening his cheeks, frosting the edges of his beard, and he could feel the deep ache of exhaustion, the way each step threatened to drain the last reserves of warmth from his body. Yet in Blizzard's steady presence, in the confidence of the dog's lead, there was a spark of hope that kept him moving, that made the impossible seem just a little possible. The storm's roar was relentless, and the snow swirled so densely that the world seemed reduced to the narrow path they tread, but Blizzard's gaze never wavered, ears tuned to the rhythm of the wind and the subtle shifts in the drifted snow. Jason could feel the bond between them tighten, a lifeline cast in the midst of the white chaos. Each glance at Blizzard a silent reassurance. "I won't let you down." The dog's paws struck with precision over hidden obstacles, his body low and taut as he navigated the treacherous terrain, and Jason followed, trusting in Blizzard's instincts, in the intelligence and loyalty that had carried them through drills, missions, and moments of peril before. And in that endless white expanse, where the storm seemed intent on swallowing everything, Blizzard paused once more, lifted his nose high, and gave a low, steady bark, a signal Jason understood instinctively, a wordless communication that the light ahead was within reach if they could take just a few more steps. Jason swallowed, steeling himself, and together they pushed forward, trudging through the biting cold, the snow crunching beneath their feet, hearts synchronized in their determination, until the faint glow of the cabin grew stronger, warmer, a beacon that promised sanctuary, a place where the storm could not reach them, and where the bond between man and dog would once again be their greatest shield against the unforgiving wilderness. The cabin door creaked softly as Sergeant Jason Blake pushed it open, the warmth of the interior washing over him in waves that chased away the biting chill clinging to his jacket. Blizzard padded beside him, his white coat dusted with snow, leaving damp paw prints on the wooden floorboards that glimmered under the soft light of a single lantern. Jason's breath came in steady, deliberate puffs, and he could feel the tension in his shoulders slowly unraveling as he set down his pack and glanced around the small, rustic space. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine, carrying a calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the storm outside. Blizzard sniffed every corner, ears flicking, tail low but alert, as if marking this place as a temporary haven for both of them. Jason knelt, rubbing his hands over the dog's shoulders, feeling the heat radiate from his loyal companion, the bond between them deepened by the shared ordeal. He moved to the lantern and adjusted it slightly, letting the warm glow illuminate the room, revealing the simple furnishings, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a cot pushed into the corner with a thick blanket draped over it. The faint creak of the wood beneath his boots sounded almost musical against the distant howl of the wind outside. Blizzard's amber eyes caught a glint of movement near the window, and he padded over, nose lifted, sniffing the crisp air that had sneaked in through a small crack in the frame. Jason followed, watching the snow swirl past, a reminder of how treacherous the journey had been and how close they had come to being trapped in the storm. He exhaled, letting the relief sink into his chest, the warmth of the cabin slowly seeping into his frozen muscles. The dog returned to his side, nudging Jason with a wet nose, a silent affirmation that the danger had passed for now and that they had found safety, however temporary. Jason sat on the cot, brushing the snow from his coat, and let his gaze sweep over Blizzard, noting the subtle rise and fall of his chest, the slight twitch of his ears as he listened to the storm's rhythm outside. The moment was fragile, yet powerful, a quiet triumph born from perseverance and instinct. He placed a hand on the dog's head, feeling the soft fur between his fingers, and whispered softly, almost as if sharing a secret, "We made it this far, thanks to you." Blizzard leaned into the touch, eyes meeting Jason's with a depth of understanding that required no words, a trust forged through countless missions, drills, and shared adversity. Outside, the storm howled on, but inside, there was stillness, punctuated only by the faint hiss of snow sliding from the roof and the soft padding of Blizzard's paws on the floorboards. Jason pulled the thick blanket from the cot and spread it across the table, setting his pack against the wall and checking the contents. A few energy bars, a bottle of water, and his compass, the last of the few items that had survived the trek unscathed. He took a deep breath, the smell of pine and smoke grounding him, reminding him of the forest beyond and the journey that had brought them here. Blizzard lay at his feet, tail twitching slightly as he rested his head on Jason's boot, listening to the faint creaks and settling noises of the cabin, every muscle relaxed but ready, a sentinel even in this haven. Jason closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the exhaustion press down, yet buoyed by the knowledge that they had survived, that they were together, and that the storm, for all its fury, could not sever the bond that had guided them through it. The lantern flickered gently, casting dancing shadows across the walls, illuminating the snow-laden branches outside and the tracks they had left behind, a reminder of the passage they had endured. Jason reached into his pack and pulled out a small notebook, jotting down notes, sketching a rough map of the path, careful to capture the landmarks Blizzard had led him by, understanding that this record, fragile and handwritten, would be proof of the instincts and courage of the companion who had never let him falter. Blizzard lifted his head, ears perked, sensing the shift in Jason's attention, and nudged the notebook with his nose, a playful reminder that while the storm had passed, the adventure had not ended, and that vigilance and partnership were constant necessities in a world that could change with a single gust of wind. Jason smiled, stroking Blizzard's head again, the warmth of the cabin and the company of his dog a balm against the long hours of fear and exertion, a pause that allowed both of them to gather strength, to rest, and to prepare for the journey ahead, knowing that with Blizzard by his side, no blizzard, no matter how fierce, could truly overwhelm them. Blizzard did not sleep long. His head lifted from Jason's boot with a sudden stillness, not fear, not alarm, but a tension so complete that the little cabin seemed to hold its breath with him. Jason had been resting with one shoulder against the wall, the lantern glow soft across his face, when he felt the dog shift. He opened his eyes slowly. Outside, the storm still moved over the mountain like a living thing, pressing snow against the windows, rattling the thin glass, breathing through every crack in the old timber. For a moment, Jason heard only wind. Then Blizzard gave a low whine and stood, his ears angled toward the back wall, where stacked firewood leaned beneath a shelf of old jars and folded canvas. Jason sat upright, every tired muscle answering with a dull ache. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice rough from cold and exhaustion. Blizzard took 3 careful steps across the floor, nose moving in slow circles. He did not bark. He did not scratch. He simply stopped beside the firewood and stared at the narrow seam between the planks. Jason knew that look. He had seen it during training exercises in North Carolina, seen it near buried supplies, lost gloves, hidden trails, anything the human eye missed, but a dog's soul seemed born to notice. He rose from the cot, pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders, and crossed the room. The floor was colder here. The lantern flame trembled as if it, too, had sensed something waiting. Blizzard touched his nose to the lower board and gave one soft breath. Jason crouched, brushing away dust and wood chips with his glove. At first, he saw nothing except age. Then his fingers found a small iron pull ring, nearly swallowed by a layer of grime. His chest tightened. "Well now," he murmured. "What did you find?" The ring resisted at first, frozen by years of neglect. Jason wedged his fingers under it and pulled with both hands. The hidden panel lifted with a groan, revealing a shallow compartment beneath the wall, dark and dry despite the storm hammering outside. Blizzard leaned close, sniffing, tail still. Inside rested a metal box, no bigger than a lunch pail, wrapped in an old wool scarf the color of faded blue sky. Jason drew it out gently and set it on the floor between them. The box was cold enough to sting through his gloves. There was no lock, only a clasp stiff with age. When he opened it, the scent rose first, paper, cedar, and something faintly sweet, like lavender trapped in time. Inside were letters tied with twine, a small black and white photograph, a child's red mitten, and a United States Marine Corps dog tag on a broken chain. Jason went very still. The storm outside seemed to fall away. In the photograph, a young Marine stood in front of this very cabin, smiling beneath a wool cap, one hand resting on the head of a pale German shepherd whose coat looked almost white against the snow. Beside him stood a woman holding a little girl in a heavy winter coat, the child's mitten bright even in the faded picture. Jason swallowed. Blizzard lowered himself beside the box, his amber eyes fixed on the photograph as though he recognized some old kindness lingering there. Jason picked up the dog tag and held it near the lantern. The letters were worn but readable. Corporal Matthew Ellis, United States Marine Corps. He turned the tag over. On the back, scratched by hand with uneven care, were 4 words. "Bring them home safe." Jason felt something quiet move through him, not shock exactly, and not fear, but the deep ache of a story that had waited too long to be heard. He opened one of the letters carefully, the paper fragile at the folds. The handwriting was neat, patient, the kind of writing made by someone trying to stay calm during a hard winter. "My dearest Anna," it began, "if the snow keeps me here one more night, I will follow the ridge at first light. Scout knows the trail better than any man I have ever met. He keeps looking toward the North Pass as if he hears someone calling." Jason lowered the letter, eyes drifting to Blizzard. The white K9 had come to the cabin not by chance, not only for shelter, but towards something buried beneath years of silence. The faint light they had followed through the snow had not been a fire, not really. It had been the lantern reflecting off the old window, catching the storm at just the right angle, calling them in like a memory. Jason read a little more, and the words gathered weight. Corporal Ellis had been stationed nearby during a winter rescue decades earlier, helping stranded families reach the road after a storm closed the mountain. He had used this cabin as a way station, leaving supplies for anyone who might come after him. And then, in one final letter, written in a hand less steady than the others, he had asked whoever found the box to look for the blue house near Pine Creek and tell Anna that he kept his promise as long as God gave him breath. Jason closed his eyes. In the silence, Blizzard placed one paw gently on the edge of the scarf. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, the cabin no longer felt abandoned. It felt entrusted. Jason traced the edges of the metal box with careful fingers, feeling the coldness seep through his gloves, but he did not rush. Blizzard stood beside him, head high, ears pivoting with every creak and groan of the cabin as the wind pressed against the walls, making the structure seem alive, as though it was listening to their discovery. He lifted his paw once, pressing gently against the scarf-covered letters as if urging Jason to continue, and Jason could not help but smile at the steadfast patience of his companion. He pulled out the first letter, unfolding it slowly, the paper brittle under his touch, and began to read aloud in a low, steady voice, making certain Blizzard could hear every word. The words described the harsh winter nights of decades past, the roads closed by snow, families stranded and fearful, and the young Marine, Corporal Matthew Ellis, leaving provisions in this very cabin to ensure that anyone following could find warmth and safety. The story unfolded with care, each letter a window into the life of someone who had walked the mountains before them, someone who had trusted that others, like them, would come in need. Jason felt the weight of history in his hands, the echoes of footsteps long since gone, and the sense that Blizzard had led him not only through the storm outside, but into this legacy, a bridge between past and present, survival and hope. He continued reading, each line a map of compassion, detailing exactly where food, blankets, and wood had been hidden, the very things that had sustained them tonight, the same provisions that now seemed to testify to the foresight and kindness of a stranger. Blizzard lay close, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of Jason's voice, eyes bright and reflective, as if acknowledging the trust placed in them both. The dog nudged a folded piece of paper toward Jason, and he picked it up, finding a hand-drawn map, edges curled with age, depicting the small cabin, nearby landmarks, and a path to the blue house near Pine Creek. A quiet awe settled in Jason's chest. He could see the line of reasoning, the careful planning, and the deep concern for anyone who might wander these mountains alone. He felt a connection across time, a silent agreement between the men who loved and protected their companions, human and canine alike. Blizzard shifted, tail sweeping gently over the floor, nudging Jason's leg with a soft insistence, and Jason realized that this night had been more than survival. It had been guidance, trust, and the unfolding of a story he was now part of. He gathered the letters together, placing them back in the box, and for a moment simply sat, letting the reality of the storm, the cabin, and the dog beside him sink in. The wind continued to sweep across the mountains outside, rattling branches and carrying the scent of pine and snow, but inside there was warmth, quiet, and a profound sense of continuity. Jason brushed the snow from Blizzard's shoulders, feeling the muscles ripple beneath the thick white coat, and whispered a quiet thanks, not only for the companionship, but for the guidance that had brought them safely to this moment. The dog tilted his head, ears flicking at the faint sound of snow shifting outside, and Jason smiled again, knowing that they had survived together, guided by instinct, courage, and the unspoken understanding between them. The lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls, illuminating the wooden floor, the letters, and the steadfast gaze of Blizzard. Jason allowed himself a deep breath, the first calm one since the blizzard had begun, feeling the snow and cold melt away in the presence of warmth and trust, and in that quiet cabin, amidst the preserved history and the soft glow of light, he understood that survival was more than endurance. It was discovery, guidance, and the bond that carried them both through the storm and into the promise of tomorrow. By morning, the storm had softened, not ended, but softened enough for the world beyond the cabin to take shape again. Dawn came pale and slow through the frosted window, turning the snow outside from black to blue to silver, and Sergeant Jason Blake stood at the door with the old metal box tucked safely inside his pack. Blizzard waited beside him, white fur brushed clean, amber eyes fixed on the ridge beyond the trees as if he had been watching it in dreams. The cabin had kept them alive through the worst of the night, but the letters had given Jason something more demanding than shelter. They had given him a promise to carry. He looked once more at the hand-drawn map, the faded line leading from the cabin to Pine Creek, then folded it with care and slid it into the front pocket of his jacket. "Blue house," he murmured. Blizzard's ears lifted at the sound of his voice. "Let us go find it." The door opened with a long wooden sigh, and cold air rushed in, sharp with pine and clean snow. Jason stepped out first, testing the depth with his boot. Nearly 18 inches had fallen in places, piled high against the porch and curled around the base of the pines like waves frozen in mid-motion. Blizzard moved ahead without hesitation, nose low, tail steady, his body cutting a path through the powder. Jason followed, slower now, rested but still sore, every breath rising before him in white clouds. The mountain was quiet in the way only a snowbound place can be quiet, not empty, but muffled, as though the earth had pulled a blanket over every sound. Branches bowed beneath the weight of ice. Somewhere far off, a crow called once, then nothing. The tracks from the night before had vanished completely, erased by wind and snow, but Blizzard did not need them. He moved like he was following something deeper than scent, something left behind in the bones of the land. Jason kept the cabin behind him in view until the trees swallowed it, and when it disappeared, he felt a small tremor of uncertainty. Blizzard stopped at once and looked back. Not impatient, not worried, just present. Jason gave a tired nod. "I am with you." The dog turned and continued. For nearly a mile, they followed the ridge through drifts and leaning spruce, passing landmarks from the map that seemed almost miraculous when they appeared through the white. A split boulder shaped like a sleeping bear, a fallen pine crossing a shallow ravine, a narrow stand of birch trees pale as candle wax. Each discovery tightened the thread between the letters and the living world. Corporal Matthew Ellis had walked here. Scout had walked here. Someone had loved this path enough to draw it for strangers. Jason paused beside the split boulder, resting one hand against its snow-crusted face. The stone was cold, but his chest felt strangely warm. He thought of all the promises men make when they do not know whether morning will come, promises whispered to wives, to children, to dogs waiting by doors, to God in the dark. Some promises are too heavy for one lifetime, he thought. Sometimes they wait for another pair of hands. Blizzard suddenly lifted his head. His body went still. Jason followed his gaze downhill, where the forest opened toward a shallow valley. At first, there was only white. Then the wind shifted, revealing the faint outline of a roof beneath a burden of snow. A chimney, a porch rail, and below it, weathered siding the color of old cornflower blue. Jason's breath caught. The blue house near Pine Creek was real. Blizzard gave one soft bark and started down the slope, careful but eager, glancing back every few yards to make sure Jason followed. The descent was steep, and Jason moved slowly, planting each boot with discipline, feeling the old ache in his knees, the pull in his shoulders, the stubborn burn of cold air. But the house grew clearer with every step. It sat near a frozen creek, small and worn but still standing, with smoke rising faintly from the chimney in a thin gray ribbon. Smoke meant someone was there. Jason stopped at the edge of the yard. His heartbeat sounded louder than the creek beneath its ice. For a moment, he almost felt like an intruder, carrying a story that belonged to someone else. Blizzard walked to the porch first. He did not bark this time. He simply sat at the bottom step, lifted his nose, and let out a quiet whine so gentle it seemed less like a sound than a greeting. The front curtain moved. A face appeared behind the glass, small and aged, framed by white hair. The door opened slowly. An elderly woman stood there in a heavy cardigan, one hand resting on the frame, eyes narrowing against the morning glare. She looked at Jason, then at Blizzard, and something in her face changed before he said a word. Not recognition of him. Recognition of the impossible. Jason removed his glove, reached into his jacket, and held up the dog tag on its broken chain. His voice came softly, carried by the cold. "Ma'am, my name is Sergeant Jason Blake. I found something in the cabin up on the ridge." The woman's hand rose to her mouth. Blizzard remained seated in the snow, still as prayer. Jason took one careful step closer. "I think it belonged to Corporal Matthew Ellis." The woman closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, tears shone there, not sudden and loud, but quiet, the kind that have been waiting a long time for permission to fall. "Matthew," she whispered, as if the name itself had come home through the storm. Jason stepped. carefully onto the porch, snow crunching beneath his boots, Blizzard moving close with a measured patience, amber eyes scanning the surroundings with quiet intelligence. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and winter pine, a calm that contrasted with the raging storm they had left behind. Jason's hands shook slightly from the cold and adrenaline, yet his movements were deliberate, steady, aware of the weight of the letters, the photograph, and the dog tag he carried. The elderly woman stepped aside, her expression softening as Blizzard lowered himself, head brushing Jason's leg, tail wagging slowly, a gentle acknowledgement of trust. Jason removed his pack carefully, setting it down, and opened the dog tag in his hands once more, letting the faint sunlight glint off the metal, a fragile connection to the man whose legacy had guided them. Blizzard moved to the edge of the porch, nose twitching, as if sensing something beneath the snow-covered yard. Jason followed, curiosity and caution mingling in equal measure, tracing the edge of the foundation, noting the footprints from years past that the snow had preserved in faint impressions. The woman watched silently, hands folded, the wind teasing her hair, the first hints of warmth touching her cheeks despite the chill. Jason unfolded the map again, comparing landmarks to the surrounding trees, and together with Blizzard, they navigated the slope toward the frozen creek at the back of the yard. Each careful step through the soft snow revealed familiar contours, a leaning pine, a boulder half buried in frost, the narrow path leading toward the creek's edge. Blizzard paused often, head high, ears swiveling, then nudged Jason gently, urging him to continue, his body a guide and a guardian. The creek sparkled under the weak winter sun, ice forming delicate ridges along its edges, and Jason's gaze swept the area, noticing subtle shifts in the snow that hinted at previous passage. Blizzard sniffed along the bank, then sat, tail wagging slowly, drawing Jason's attention to a small indentation in the snow, a faint disturbance that suggested movement, a sign left for those who knew where to look. Jason knelt, brushing aside the top layer, uncovering a wooden crate weathered and cracked, but intact, tucked partially beneath the overhang of a fallen log. He lifted the lid, the scent of aged wood, cedar, and cold air rising, and found within a neatly folded wool blanket a small tin of provisions, and another letter, edges frayed, handwriting deliberate and steady. Jason's fingers trembled slightly as he read aloud, words carefully chosen, describing supplies left for travelers, guidance for anyone who might follow, and instructions to carry the story forward. Blizzard shifted, resting his head on Jason's knee, eyes attentive, ears angled toward every sound, as if affirming that the discovery was meaningful not only for the human, but for the continuity of the trust and care embedded in the cabin. Jason paused, closing his eyes briefly, listening to the wind over the snow-laden branches, feeling the pulse of history beneath his feet and the quiet heartbeat of loyalty beside him. The elderly woman stepped forward, voice soft, trembling slightly, asking if they had come far, and Jason nodded, explaining the journey, the cabin, the letters, and Blizzard's guidance, each word carrying the weight of experience and reverence. She smiled faintly, eyes misting with emotion, recognizing the dog not merely as an animal, but as a living bridge between past and present, a companion that had carried the legacy across years, snow, and isolation. Jason arranged the letters in his pack carefully, noting each detail, and stood, feeling the snow shift beneath his boots, Blizzard immediately aligning beside him, ready to continue. The wind picked up, playful rather than threatening, and Jason inhaled the crisp air, feeling the exhaustion and tension of the storm night ebb as a sense of purpose and quiet triumph settled into his chest. Blizzard barked once, soft, low, a note of encouragement, and Jason understood fully. Their journey was far from over, yet the storm had passed enough to reveal the path, the legacy, and the trust that had guided them safely. And in the stillness of the morning, among the frost and pine, the bond between man and dog, between the past and the present, was undeniable, steadfast and warm. The elderly woman invited Jason inside before the cold could take back the little warmth the morning had given them, and the blue house opened around him with the quiet dignity of a place that had outlived many winters. The room smelled of cedar, coffee, and old photographs, with a small fire glowing in the stove and a hand-woven rug spread across the floor near the hearth. Blizzard stepped in only after Jason gave a gentle nod, then paused at the threshold as though he understood that this was not simply a house, but a memory still breathing. The woman introduced herself as Anna Ellis, her voice thin with age but steady with grace, and when Jason placed the metal box on her kitchen table, she touched it with both hands, not opening it at once, only resting her fingers on the lid the way a person might touch a door they had waited decades to see unlocked. Jason stood respectfully beside the table, his cap in his hands, while Blizzard settled near his boots, watchful and calm, the white of his coat glowing softly in the firelight. Anna looked at the dog for a long moment, her eyes searching him with a wonder that seemed to move through years. Matthew had one like him, she said softly. Scout, white as church snow, stubborn as a mule, gentle as Sunday morning. Jason said nothing. Some silences did not need to be filled. Anna opened the box slowly. The photograph came first. Her breath caught, small and fragile, and she pressed one hand to her chest as if the sight had reached deeper than memory. In the picture, Corporal Matthew Ellis stood young and smiling beside the pale German shepherd, while Anna, much younger then, held a little girl in a winter coat. The red mitten in the box matched the one on the child's hand. Anna picked it up and held it against her palm. Emily lost this the week before the storm, she whispered. He must have found it. Jason lowered his eyes, feeling the weight of that small red mitten more than he expected. It was nothing, really. A scrap of wool. A child's lost thing. But in Anna's trembling hands, it became proof that love remembers details even when the world forgets whole lives. She unfolded the letters one by one, and Jason watched the years return to her face, not making her younger, but lighting something that time had covered. Outside, the wind moved against the window, softer now, brushing snow from the sill in feathery sheets. Blizzard lifted his head and gave a quiet breath, then rose and padded toward the far wall, where a shelf held framed photographs, a folded American flag, and an old brass collar tag hanging from a nail. Anna noticed. Her lips parted. That was Scout's, she said. Blizzard sat beneath it and stared up without blinking. Jason felt the hairs rise along his arms, not from fear, but from that strange and holy feeling that comes when the world seems to lean close and whisper that nothing kind is ever truly lost. Anna crossed the room slowly, took the collar tag from the nail, and carried it back to the table. The metal was dulled with age, engraved with one name. Scout. Beneath it, smaller letters read, Find the way home. Jason looked down at Blizzard. The dog's ears softened, and for the first time since they had reached the house, he lowered his head fully to the rug, as if some duty had finally been acknowledged. Anna sat down, still holding the tag. Matthew left during that storm to guide a family off the ridge, she said. The sheriff told me he made it as far as the creek crossing before the road disappeared under snow. They found the family 2 days later, safe in a barn near town. But Matthew and Scout never came back. Her voice did not break. It had broken long ago, perhaps so many times that now it had learned to carry sorrow gently. Jason listened, the firelight shifting across his face, and he understood then why the cabin had felt entrusted, why the hidden provisions had been kept so carefully, why the letters had not belonged to the past alone. Matthew Ellis had not vanished into tragedy. He had left behind a path, a map, a promise, a way for others to survive. Anna looked at the dog tag in Jason's hand, and then at the letters, and a tear slid down her cheek, quiet and silver. I prayed for years to know whether he was afraid, she said. Jason drew a careful breath, remembering the final letter, the steady handwriting, the instructions for strangers, the words about Scout knowing the trail. Ma'am, he said softly, I do not think he was thinking about fear. I think he was thinking about getting people home. Anna closed her eyes. Blizzard rose then, crossed to her side, and rested his head gently against her knee. She placed one shaking hand on his white fur. The room became very still. The fire crackled low. Snow tapped softly against the glass. Jason watched the old woman and the dog, and something in him loosened, some knot of winter and duty and loneliness. He had followed Blizzard through a storm to find shelter, but now he saw the deeper miracle. The storm had not only guided them to safety, it had guided a Marine's last kindness back to the woman who had spent a lifetime waiting to hear it. Anna kept her hand on Blizzard's head for a long time, as if the warmth beneath her palm had answered a question no one in town had known how to ask. Jason stood by the kitchen table with the letters spread carefully before him, each page held flat by a coffee mug, a sugar bowl, or Anna's old reading glasses. The room was quiet except for the stove breathing heat into the morning and the soft tick of an antique clock on the wall. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, not with the fury of the night before, but in wide, gentle flakes that drifted past the window like feathers from a torn white wing. Anna read every letter in order. She did not rush. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she pressed her fingertips to one line and held them there. Sometimes her eyes moved to the photograph, to the young man in uniform, to the child in the red mitten, to the pale dog standing proudly beside them. Jason watched without interrupting. He had learned in the Marine Corps that some moments require discipline deeper than action. They require stillness. Blizzard seemed to understand it too. He rested beside Anna's chair, calm and solemn, as though guarding the silence itself. When Anna reached the final letter, her hands trembled so much that Jason gently offered to read it for her. She nodded once. He picked up the paper, careful not to crease it, and the words looked different in the firelight. Softer somehow, as if Corporal Matthew Ellis had written them not from fear, but from faith. My dearest Anna, Jason read, if this letter finds you, then it means someone made it to the cabin after me. That is good. That means the place did what we built it to do. The ridge is rough tonight, but Scout keeps finding the safest ground. He pauses when I need breath and looks back like he is the one giving orders. You would laugh at that. Tell Emily her mitten is in my coat pocket. I meant to bring it home. Tell her I saw a fox by the creek and thought of the picture she drew on Sunday. Tell her her daddy was warm because he carried both of you with him. Jason's voice slowed, but he kept reading. I do not know how far the snow will let us go. I only know there are people ahead who need help, and I cannot ignore that. A Marine does not leave someone in the cold when he still has legs beneath him and a dog willing to lead. If I am delayed, do not let waiting become your whole life. Let love be a lamp, not a chain. Let it show the way for somebody else. Jason stopped, not because the words ended, but because his throat had tightened around the next breath. Anna closed her eyes. The clock ticked once, twice. Blizzard pressed his head more firmly against her knee. Jason continued, quieter now. If Scout and I do not come home by morning, know this. I was not alone. The good Lord sent me with the bravest soul he could fit inside a dog. Jason lowered the letter. The silence after those words filled the room completely. Anna covered her mouth with both hands. And for a moment, she was not an old woman in a blue house by Pine Creek. She was a young wife hearing her husband's voice carried home across decades of snow. She was a mother holding a little girl's mitten. She was someone who had waded through every winter and had finally been given mercy in the shape of a letter and a white dog. Jason folded the page carefully and set it beside the photograph. Anna reached for the brass collar tag and placed it next to Matthew's dog tag, metal beside metal. Promise beside promise. He was not alone, she whispered. Jason shook his head. No, ma'am. He was not. Blizzard stood then, slow and deliberate, and walked toward the window. His ears lifted. Jason followed his gaze through the falling snow toward the creek and the white ridge beyond. The storm had hidden the world last night. Now it revealed it piece by piece. Anna rose with effort, one hand on the table, and joined them at the window. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. Then the clouds opened just enough for sunlight to reach the valley, a pale gold beam touching the frozen creek, the porch rail, the old blue siding, and finally Blizzard's white coat. The dog glowed in that light, not like a ghost, not like a sign made for spectacle, but like a living creature standing exactly where he was meant to stand. Anna let out a small laugh through her tears. Matthew always said God wastes nothing, she murmured. Jason looked down at the letters, at the mitten, at the two tags resting together, and understood the meaning in a way he never could have the day before. The cabin had saved his body. The box had carried a memory. But Blizzard had done what no map, no compass, and no human plan could have done alone. He had followed the thread of kindness left in the world and brought it back to the one heart still waiting for it. The sunlight shifted slowly across the blue house, casting long shadows over the snow-laden yard and turning the icy creek into a river of glimmering silver. Jason Blake stood with Blizzard at his side, both watching the soft light reveal the contours of the mountains beyond, the trees etched in frost like delicate glass sculptures. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of pine and wood smoke, a calm so profound it seemed to settle into every bone and muscle. Anna Ellis held the dog tag and the folded letters against her chest, tears still glimmering in her eyes, but her smile was steady now, gentle as the morning. Blizzard lifted his head, ears attentive, and let out a soft, low breath, then nudged Jason's hand with his nose, a reminder that they had not only survived, but had brought life back to stories left waiting decades. Jason knelt beside Blizzard, running his fingers through the thick white coat, feeling the warmth and loyalty radiate like a quiet light, and he spoke softly, words meant only for the dog. "We found them, Blizzard. We did exactly what we came to do." The dog responded with a tilt of his head and a slow wag of his tail, the language between them deeper than any speech. Outside, the snow continued to drift lazily, melting slightly under the gentle morning sun, revealing footprints that led from the cabin, down the slope, and finally to this place, a path carved not by chance, but by the careful guidance of a faithful companion. Anna moved closer, placing a hand on Jason's shoulder and then on Blizzard's head, her touch warm and grounding, a bridge between the past, the storm, and the moment now. She spoke quietly, telling stories of Matthew Ellis, of Scout, of the days before the storm, and Jason listened, the narrative settling like a soft blanket over the events of the night before. Blizzard laid down at their feet, head resting gently on his paws, amber eyes reflecting the sunlight, and the quiet understanding that his work was complete, the legacy delivered safely. Jason looked out toward the mountains again, toward the ridge and the cabin that had sheltered them, feeling a profound sense of completion, not from action alone, but from the bond that had carried them through danger, cold, and uncertainty. The letters, the photograph, the mitten, and the tags all rested on the table between them, a silent testament to the endurance of care, courage, and loyalty. Blizzard lifted his head one final time, giving a single, soft bark, not of alarm, but of acknowledgement, a wordless affirmation that the thread of kindness they had followed from the cabin to the blue house had reached its intended destination. Jason knelt again, hand on the dog's shoulder, inhaling the crisp winter air and feeling a weight lift from his chest, a quiet grace settling over the three of them. Anna smiled, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe, and she looked from Blizzard to Jason, her voice hushed. "You brought him home," she said. Jason nodded. Blizzard leaned forward, resting his muzzle gently against Jason's knee, as though sharing in the completion of a journey that had begun far from here, across snow, across decades, across hope and waiting. The soft crunch of snow outside the doorway, the distant murmur of the creek beneath its frozen surface, and the pale warmth of sunlight combined into a single, almost sacred rhythm, and Jason felt it, the silent heartbeat of a promise kept, of lives connected, of stories carried home. Blizzard shifted slightly, ears flicking, tail sweeping the floor softly, and Jason whispered again, "Even the smallest act of guidance can save a life, or 100 lives, in ways you might never see." Anna pressed her hand to the dog's head once more, eyes glistening, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, suspended between snow, sunlight, and the quiet understanding of a mission fulfilled. Jason stood, letting Blizzard rise with him, and together they looked out over Pine Creek, the mountains, the snow, and the soft glow of morning, knowing that the bond between them, between man and dog, between past and present, had created a path of grace that would linger long after the day had ended. Blizzard sat, tail sweeping gently across the floorboards, head held high, and Jason placed a hand on his back, feeling the steady pulse of life and trust, the culmination of a journey guided by courage, instinct, and unwavering loyalty. In that stillness, with sunlight streaming through frost-lined windows and snow drifting quietly outside, the three of them shared a silence full of understanding, gratitude, and the calm satisfaction of having brought hope, history, and love safely together.